And here's our famous blackberry wine recipe.
I'm Greg.
I'm Julie, and we're the Crafty Winers.
So we are going to show you how we make our blackberry wine from frozen blackberries. They could be fresh blackberries that you freeze. And
Nori's got something to say.
Nori is already starting off, being loud and obnoxious. Pippin is saying, I want my dinner. But you gotta wait a little bit longer for dinner. Okay? So, we are going to use this great value fruit, but again, it could be fresh blackberries that you use, or you could use any other brand of frozen blackberries. We're using 4 pounds of frozen blackberries in this case. We don't like using less than that for our fruit-based wines. And this is probably our favorite fruit-based wine other than grape wine, or favorite non-grape fruit wine. How's that?
Grapefruit wine?
Grapefruit. I don't think I want grapefruit.
We haven't made grapefruit wine.
We have not. We have made grapefruit flavored cider.
Yes, we have.
So we're using this big bowl basically just to catch the juice, and a brewer's bag. You can use cheesecloth or other types of bags that are out there. And I touched the dog, so I'm going to sanitize my hand again. So she just asked the specific gravity, and the calculator for the must is going to be 1.00 because it's water that we're going to be adding. We're not quite to that point, but we put that in there so that we are ready when we get to that point. So with the bag and the bowl, I'm going to pour all of the blackberries into the bag. The juice is going to run right out into the bowl, and that's good.
And we're not going to throw these on the floor, though the dogs would probably like it.
The dogs would love the blackberry juice. Know that. You could use the sucky thing to try to get all of the juice out of these bags. We don't usually bother. There's usually very little left.
Yeah, there's really nothing in this though.
We intentionally used a small bag because we knew that it would be big enough for the blackberries. And it's easier to deal with.
Yeah, the big bags are kind of getting in the way.
We'll end up needing a weight or two, probably 2 fermenting weights. We'll add about 64 ounces of water to this just so that the juice is not sticking to our container. I put 48 ounces of water in there because that's what was in my water container, and that's fine. I'm just trying to keep the juice from pooling up down at the bottom and staining my container. Then I'm squeezing all the juice that I can possibly get out of this bag now. It's not important for a gravity reading because we're basically going to ignore the gravity reading with this method. But it is important for an approximate pH. So you want to have as much of the juice out of the bag and into the water as possible. Okay, usually they just totally ignore the bottles that I throw down there, but tonight Nori is going to use it as a toy. It's a ball or something. So the more of this you can squeeze out, the better it is, because your pH will be more accurate.
It's a lot of squeezing.
And this is the first of 3 times that you'll be doing a lot of squeezing on this bag.
She's rolling it around the ground.
Okay, so now I want most of the juice to go into my pitcher, but I'm not going to put my bag in there yet. So this becomes kind of a little bit of an acrobatic endeavor. And I'm going to go ahead and let that bag sit in there and drain a little bit more of that juice out while we're waiting. But I'm going to get this off my hands real quick. So now we've got a good portion of the juice that's in the berries is actually now in our pitcher. So now we'll fill this up to the 96 ounce mark with purified drinking water, not distilled water. So on these wines that start with berries or grapes even, a lot of the sugar that is going to end up becoming fermented is actually in the berries, and the hydrometer is not going to reflect that sugar. So for this type of wine, we ignore the hydrometer for the for the initial gravity reading and use our calculator. So our calculator lets us tell it how much of what frozen fruit we're using, and it will calculate how much sugar is generally going to be in there. Obviously that can vary a little bit, but it's going to vary very little between bags of frozen fruit. So what it is telling us, and we want 10.5, it's telling us how much sugar is in the fruit.
So total sugar in the fruit is 147 grams.
Okay, so it's subtracting that out of the sugar that we would need to make this 10.5% alcohol. So it's saying that we need to add
25.2 ounces.
Okay, so we're going to get that 25.2 ounces of sugar ready, and you'll get an idea of why we wanted to only fill this up to the 96 ounce mark when we do that. This is 25.2 ounces of sugar.
That's a lot of sugar.
So thank God this becomes alcohol and is not going to stay in there as sugar, because it would definitely not be on my diet.
Mine either.
So that took it up to the 112 ounce mark. So now we're going to add water to get it up to the gallon mark, which is 128 for those of you that are ounce challenged. And then I'm going to use our pumpkin gutter to mix this up really good. This is, of course, linked in the description. If you don't have one, they make it so nice.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, got it mixed up real good. We are not taking a gravity because we are going to use the initial gravity that the calculator said, which is
1.08.
So she's writing that on the batch note.
The batch note that I don't have.
I have a batch note.
Thank you.
If you don't know why batch notes are valuable, you can watch our video on batch notes. It's over there someplace. And I am going to wash the preserving liquid off the tip of our pH meter so that I can take pH. pH right now is 3.77. So we're going to probably want to add about a quarter teaspoon of potassium bicarbonate. So she's just going to add that to the measuring cup that we're already dealing with here. But we want our pH to be at around 4 to start, as close to 4 as we can manage before we start the fermentation. So I think a quarter cup will get us in the vicinity.
You want to give me some juice?
I'll give you some juice.
And then I'll go grab the potassium bicarbonate.
We have a pH management video you can watch to find out why pH is important and how to deal with it and how to use meters and all of that fun stuff. I'll link it above.
I'm going to put in half a teaspoon of pectic enzyme.
Pectic enzyme will help break down the sugars that are in the blackberries. It's more important now than it is when you use concentrate, but we also use it for concentrate usually as well. It just helps make it very clear wine and use all the sugars.
And how much did you say I should add of this?
I think probably a quarter, but we may end up doing a half, but let's start with a quarter.
I don't have the quarter teaspoon.
Well, if you have a half, just
have a half.
Do a little less than a half.
Okay. This is very, very accurate measuring here. Oop. How about I spread it all over the towel too? How about that?
That's good.
Okay.
I think it'll be over a quarter, but less than a half.
Okay. Stir this stuff up. I need a pumpkin gutter for this. Yeah. There's a little mini one.
See if I'll get on that. See what I can do. I don't know if I like the idea of using power tools, though. You might hurt yourself.
Really? I've used the drill.
Hammer a nail in?
Yes. In fact, I did. No.
Stir it up real good. Now I will take the pH again, and hopefully we're right around 4. I have faith that we will be. 4.04.
Good.
So I'm going to rinse our pH meter off, and then we will keep going. So now I'm going to give her some must again. This is now pH friendly to the yeast. About a quarter cup, a little more maybe. And
I am going to take it and heat it up in the microwave for approximately 10 seconds, or you can put it in front of a heater like we do most of the time, or a warm place like a hot water heater room.
Want it to be 80, 85, 90 degrees, someplace in that range?
Okay, so I heated this up for 10 seconds, which is usually about right for room temperature must. If it comes out of the fridge, it usually takes a little bit longer.
Yeah, we have a thermometer. If you have a thermometer, check it. It's better to not have it too hot because you can kill your yeast.
Yes. And then I'm going to add to this 2 teaspoons of Go Firm, which is the way we like to do our wines. It's not required by any means, but it works really well for us.
It kickstarts the yeast right off the bat, and it gives the yeast nutrient that it needs. And then we will add Fermented O at a later stage, which I'll describe here in a minute. But the Go Firm, when the yeast is initially pitched, which is what they call it when you put the yeast in the must for the first time, it gives a really good head start. We don't want there to be any challenges to our yeast that we can help it overcome.
We don't like challenges. It's pretty well stirred up. The Go Firm does also work a lot better in the warm liquid because this stuff does not want to dissolve. Okay, then I'm going to put in a teaspoon of our Fresco cider yeast.
You can use less. I've been using a half teaspoon as we get a little bit lower in our reserves of Fresco, and a half teaspoon works fine too.
Usually I just dunk this just a little bit, don't stir it, but just to get it kind of incorporated and wet. And then we will put this in front of our little heater for 2 hours before we add it to our must.
And also before that.
Oh, yes.
So I'm using a little big mouth bubbler for this one, mainly because I've got the big open top that makes it easy to put the bag into.
Well, there's no way you'd fit that through a carboy.
This was just sanitized. Everything has been sanitized, but you'll see there's a little bit of water at the bottom from just being sanitized. So I'm going to grab 2 fermentation weights to put in here and sanitize them, and I'll be right back. So these are, I think, designed for pickling, but regardless, they're glass fermentation weights. I just sanitized them. There are 2 of them in here to keep the bag down, because if the bag floats at the top, it's not really going to be doing a lot of good. You want it to be at the bottom or in the middle of your must. So I put the bag in first, usually.
It's a little easier to put it in first.
And then for the juice that leaked out, you could get carried away. If we had a sucky thing, I could get more of this juice out, but I don't have a sucky thing and there's not that much juice on there, so I'm not going to worry about it.
No, there's...
And then I pour the must in. Must is juice that we're going to ferment, which this most definitely is now.
You must have must.
I must. You mustn't miss the must.
That looks pretty.
It is pretty. So both this and the measuring cup of yeast are going to sit next to our heater for a couple of hours. That'll get them to be close to the same temperature. And then the yeast is going to go into the little big mouth bubbler. And sometimes I really hate these lids.
I always hate those lids.
Most of the time I do. You got to get them on exactly right or they don't go on. And then
pain.
So you'll see that I have now put a 1-hole bung in the top of this with a silicone tube coming out. It's called a blow-off tube. This end is going to go into the bucket of sanitizer that we've been using tonight, and this forms an airlock that bugs can't get through the star sand and up the tube, but if this goes crazy enough that it wants to come out the top, it's got a place to go, and it's not going to go all over my fermentation counter. So we're going to, this is using Fresco cider yeast, if she didn't say that.
Yeah, I said it.
And that is usually we use it for ciders, we use it for white wines. It also is really good for fruity wines, non-grape fruity wines. So we like to do a cooler temperature fermentation with Fresco cider yeast.
Yep.
So we're going to be doing this at around 55 degrees in our fermentation room. So at that temperature, now this changes based on the warmer you get, but at the cool 55, 60 degree temperature, I'm going to wait till the 5th day. And on the 5th day, I'm going to degas this using a food saver, or you could stir it a lot, or that's pretty much your option.
Stir it. Yep.
I'll put a teaspoon of Fermento. If you don't have Fermento or you didn't use GoFirm, you're probably going to be okay. It probably will come out okay without it. We just, again, have better luck when we use Fermento. So a teaspoon of Fermento on the 5th day. And then I use an aeration wand to oxygenate it, which is going to be putting pure oxygen in. I do both of those for 3 minutes apiece. You don't have to do those things, but what you do want to do for sure on the 3rd day, even if you skip those steps, is take the bag out and squeeze all the juice out that you can. You want all of the juice that's still trapped in those berries to get put into your must. And I do that on the 3rd day when I do those other maintenance items. On the 5th day.
On the 5th day for
I do them on the 5th
cool
day.
temperatures.
Yeah. So our red wines that we ferment at closer to 80 degrees, I do those things on the 3rd day rather than the 5th day.
Right.
So.
And even though this looks like a red wine,
yeah,
we're going to treat it like a white wine.
We're treating it like it's a white wine because we want it to be a very fruity filled flavor, which at the end you'll see how that worked out.
Fruity filled flavor?
Yes.
All right.
Triple F. So we will see you in probably 3 to 4 weeks when this is done. Sometimes it happens faster, sometimes it happens slower. Usually it won't take longer than a month. But you'll know when this is done when it completely quits bubbling, and you take a hydrometer reading, and the hydrometer is the same, preferably below 1.000, 3 days in a row. That's when you'll know it's done. And that's when we'll know it's done, and that's when we'll be back on camera. About 3 weeks have gone by. On the 5th day, I degassed, squeezed the juice out of the fruit. I added oxygen into the must. On the 7th day, I removed this fruit bag after I squeezed it again. Very, very good to get all the juice out. And then about 3 weeks after we pitched the yeast, it was done. So this ended up super dry.
Yeah, 0.990.
Which is an ABV of...
Comes out to 11.85.
She's writing that on the batch note. So we were after 10.5, knowing that it could go super dry. So now that it did go super dry, it still is below 12. So this still should be a very tasty blackberry wine. We won't know for a little while because this is one of those wines that really needs to sit for a while before you taste it.
Yep.
Or before you expect it to be good. We may taste it today, but it's not going to be ready. It's not going to be ready to drink today by far.
No.
So we're going to go ahead and rack this, which means get the wine off the sediment, the lees that's at the bottom, and we'll try to do it without talking so that we can speed through it. I tipped it at the end to make sure that I was getting as much of the wine as I could. As it is, we probably have a little bit too much in our 1 gallon because we need to add some stuff to it still. So we got a good yield, over 1 gallon. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do post-rack here is I'm going to give her some
liquid
wine.
Blackberry wine.
So a lot of times we'll taste them. We've done this one enough times. We know how this tastes. It's not going to have a lot of flavor. There'll be a lot of alcohol taste because it's 12%. And there'll be 0 sweetness. So we're going to fix that. And we're going to make this a very awesome wine.
Yes, we are.
Before we can do that, we have to do some things here. We got to add some additives.
I'm going to go ahead and put the Chiasol in here, 1/8 of a teaspoon. This... If I can find there we go. This needs to go in and sit for an hour before we add the rest of these things into it.
Particularly the Cheeto sand that we're going to add.
Yes.
It needs time to work by itself to clear negative particles, and then the chitosan is going to clear positive particles.
So
If you put them at the same time, they can work against each other. So this should have an hour to work. We're not going to give it an hour to work, but we're going to give it a little bit of time just because we're filming. And the dogs are hungry, and I'm hungry.
me too.
Hangry.
So while he's doing this, I'm going to go ahead and put all of these.
But the chitosan and kesosol are clearing agents, as is the bentonite that she's putting in right now.
Mm-hmm.
Notice that she's putting those things into this one, not this one, so that the kesosol is working by itself.
Yeah.
And I will put the measurements up on the screen.
Because there's a lot of them. Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
There's a half. There's close enough.
We'll see.
So we don't refill our little containers here until they go empty because we don't want there to be expired product at the bottom.
There we go.
So now it's time for us to fill that sorbate back up with from the bag.
And then the potassium metabisulfite.
Potassium sorbate in this particular wine is super important because we are going to back sweeten this.
Yes.
And we don't want the fermentation to start again. If you just add sugar without doing the potassium sorbate, or you add juice like we're going to do, concentrate, puree in this case,
Yep.
it could very well start fermenting again if this got warmed up to the point where it was warm enough for the fermentation to start again.
Yes.
You don't want to take a chance on that. So the sorbate will basically take the yeast that's already in here, it's still alive, just dormant, and makes it so that they can't reproduce enough to start a new fermentation. And this metabisulfite it helps that process. It also adds some acid, some SO2, that will help preserve this for a longer term. Although this wine doesn't normally last very long in our house.
It's not going to last for very long once it's done.
But it's a good habit to get into. Anytime you buy wine from the store, it's got sorbates and sulfites.
Sulfites. Usually, you can buy.
So again, she just put that in there.
Oh.
Normally, you're going to wait an hour. We don't do
Forgot to explain that.
We don't do it on camera because of the amount of time that it takes already to film our episodes. So our wine doesn't get as clear as yours will when you do let it sit for an hour by itself before you add those in there. Okay, so now we need to take the pH because that was also something that she could have done before she poured it in, but she forgot. It's not a for sure thing that we're going to have to adjust the pH, but
possibly.
She could have. We could have put the pH adjusting in that.
I got ahead of myself.
And our pH meter has got storage solution on the cap, so I've got to rinse it off before I use it. Okay, I'm taking our pH. We want the pH to be around 3.8, but there's wiggle room because we are going to be adding more stuff to this. I just like to get it closer to 3.8 now so that we're not having to mess with it in the next step. The closer you put the, in this case, malic acid in is what we're going to use. The closer you do that to when you bottle, the better chances it's going to be at the bottom of your bottle. You want to give it time to incorporate. So pH is 4.01. So we're going to want to add probably a quarter teaspoon of
malic,
and maybe even up. I'd say a heaping. Let's do a heaping quarter teaspoon.
I have to write a heaping quarter teaspoon on the batch note.
We don't need to.
Is that heaping enough? All right.
I think it'll be between a quarter and a half to get it down close to 3.8. And again, we don't need to be at 3.8 right now because we're going to be adding more things that are going to probably modify the pH. I just want to get it close now. And then we have to give this sorbate 24 hours to make it so that the yeast can't start fermentation again before we can back sweeten this.
Correct.
And in our case, because we're at the end of our filming session for the week, it'll be a week before we come back on and finish this, which is fine. Anything over 24 hours is good. So stir this up real good. I think I already mentioned and linked the pH video. You can find the pH video in the description below. And it'll teach you everything you need to know about pH if you don't know.
It smells better than it tastes right now.
Yeah, and again, we don't need to taste it because we've had a lot of experience with this, but it's 3.91. So just 50 minutes to toss up of whether or not I'd say let's do another quarter teaspoon now, just to not have to do it later. I took a look at trying to write a tool to put on our craftywineries.com/tools page to help you calculate how much acid or antacid you would need to put in to a mixture to adjust to the number that you wanted to adjust to. And it is so complicated. Apparently, it's not even, nobody's ever done it successfully. There's so many variables that go into it that it's really not a thing that you can do. There's buffers, and yeah, you can have we've had 2 different gallons of wine that were started at the same time from the same juice that came up with different pHs, but you understand that because it's, a living thing. The yeast does different things in each one, but they can end up with the same number, and adding the same exact amount of chemical into it comes up with a totally different number at the end. It's very
it's very weird,
unpredictable. So I'll be working on that tool, but probably you won't see it for a while. Okay, it's nice and stirred. I'm hoping for closer to 3.8.
Should be.
And we are going to be adding puree to it, and the puree is probably going to be more acidic than this is, so it will lower the pH too. So that's why I'm not totally concerned about getting it down, but it's 3.86. So we're good at stopping there for now, and we will check it again as part of the next step. This now is just going to sit. I'm not going to cold crash this until after we do the puree step. So this is literally just going to sit probably close to where it is right now at room temperature for 24 hours with a marble on top to block the airlock, keep bugs from being able to get in. And then, like I said, we're not going to be dealing with this again for a full week until we film again. And that's fine. Anything over 24 hours is fine for this yeast to get neutralized. And then we will show you how to finish this and make this a spectacular wine. Okay, well, we gave it more than 24 hours. We gave it 2 weeks for the sorbate to work.
Should really be working.
Yeah. So we are ready to add our flavoring and back sweetening, and I'll let Julie talk about what she did here.
We made a couple of wines with some puree. We used it as a back sweetening for another one of these blackberry wines, but the puree is really expensive. So we decided
$40 for a
like 32 ounces.
Yeah.
It was
ridiculous.
Stupid price. So I was like, well, we have frozen fruit. We use frozen fruit for a bunch of wines. Why can I not make my own puree? So this is puree, and I actually tasted them side by side to try to get the recipe right. And we will have a recipe on making puree. Each fruit's going to be a little bit different about the amount of sugar or
Pippin toy. Yeah. That's not a Pippin toy. It's not a Pippin toy. Sorry.
She's like, but it's fun. It rolls.
And it probably doesn't feel good going through you if you swallow it.
That is true. So each fruit is going to be a little bit different on how much sugar and citric acid and stuff that you add to it, but we'll give you a basic recipe. In this particular case, I used 16 ounces of thawed frozen blackberries. I added a total of 13 tablespoons of sugar and a total of 1 teaspoon of citric acid. And I put everything in the blender and just blended it until it was liquidy.
And you ended up with 10 ounces, I believe. 10 ounces is what our recipe calls for.
Well, actually, with the 16 ounces of blackberry, I just used the whole bag of blackberries. It was 16 ounces. But I came out with 18 ounces of puree.
Okay, so we're going to have to measure this out.
Yes. Well, this one says 10. I put 10 in one jar and 8 in the other. I used ball canning jars, which have measurements on the side.
So this is 10 ounces.
Yes.
And this is what our recipe calls for is 10 ounces. So if you make 16 ounces, just make sure that you're only putting 10 ounces in it.
Right.
You can do it however you want, but we think that the right amount of sweetness and flavor is 10 ounces for a gallon.
That's what turned out good before.
That's what turned out good.
And this is I think it's ball canning jar, and they actually have the ounces on the side, which is kind of convenient. So I just used the measurements on this for the 10 ounces.
There is not room in here for 10 ounces. So I'm going to remove about 8 ounces to give us the room for this to fit in there. And I'm going to use a measuring cup just so that I'm not being excessive. So I can predict, because we have done this before, that after this sits for a couple of months, because we're going to give this a full 2 months before we come back to taste this. In the past, what we find is right off the bat, there will be good fruit flavor, but it'll be harsh. So you need to let it sit for long enough that harshness goes away. And for us, it's about 2 months. So if you want to, this wine that I'm removing, you can stick in a container that won't allow too much oxygen to reach it and use it to put back in later, because there's going to end up being at least 1 inch of really heavy sediment at the bottom of this after 2 months. It's going to be all the puree that has separated, and it'll just float at the bottom. So you're going to lose that when you rack this. You'll lose that inch or so because you can't get the wine without the sediment. You don't want the sediment. So then you could add this back in. But you need to put this someplace where it's going to be safe for 2 months and somebody's not going to drink it thinking it's grape juice.
Maybe use another
Blackberry
ball
juice.
canning jar.
And label it.
And label
Yeah,
it.
you don't want this to be exposed to a lot of oxygen, so
I did bring a spoon to hopefully make this a little less messy to get it in.
and we've probably beat it to death, but it was a few weeks ago. Don't put anything that has sugar in here until after you've added sorbate. Or what will for sure happen when you allow this to sit in a warm area is it's going to ferment all the sugar that's in here, and then you're going to end up with a much drier blackberry wine.
And stronger.
That still doesn't have the fruit flavor because it fermented out again, and it will have 0 sugar because it fermented it into alcohol. So make sure you've done the sorbate before you do what I'm doing right now, which is adding goodness.
Blackberry goodness. Guess I could have used a spatula, brought a spatula down here. But scrape some with the spoon and then rinse it out.
We are expecting this to be one of the better wines that we've made because it has been in the past.
It doesn't want to come out.
This will be a good one. A semi-sweet blackberry wine. And
yeah, it's stuck to the glass.
That's probably good. You could do a little bit better job than we did getting that out.
I could have used a spatula. That would have worked better.
I'm going to pour some of this back in just to get this close to top. And there didn't end up being a whole lot. There's only about 4 ounces that I didn't put in there. I don't want it too full or it's going to leak out. I'm going to stir this just a little bit with our sucky thing, even though I put a little too much in it to make it
don't splash it out.
Easy to stir. It's going to have 2 months to incorporate. It will do that naturally. Something about fluid dynamics.
Ooh, fancy.
It is. I invented it.
Okay.
So we are going to stick this in our 60 or so degree fermenting area for the full 2 months.
Yep.
And then we will come back and see how it tastes. That was November. This is January. So it's been 2 months. We made it through Christmas and New Year's. Happy 2025.
Woohoo!
So you can see. Can you grab that flashlight?
Yes, I can.
You can see all the sediment at the bottom of this. This is the puree that we added. I don't know how well this is translating on camera, but
I can see it though. Just trust me.
so there's a little over 1 inch of sediment, very thick sediment down at the bottom. So there's also a lot of flavor that's down there, and probably the wine that's closest to that sediment probably has more flavor than what's at the top. So unfortunately, I need to stir this before we taste it. So all that crap is going to be
stirred back up.
It's good crap.
Good crap.
But for us to get a full taste of this, that needs to be stirred up first. And then we'll end up cold crashing this as the last step before bottling. But there's going to be probably a little bit of maybe rind type flavor that comes out because of the particles that are in this now. But you can ignore those because when you cold crash it and rack it, that part will go away. Trust me on that.
Trust him, he says.
You can see the particles, and that's,
I'm going to ignore the particles.
just ignore the particles.
It smells yummy. Yeah. I like that.
Yep, that's good. Now, different people are going to have different ideas of the sweetness level that they prefer.
True.
This is dry-ish. There's a little bit of sugar that came from the puree. I could see that a lot of people might want it to be sweeter, and that's fine. All you need to do is just add some sugar to it. We have added potassium sorbate to this already, so there isn't fear of re-fermentation starting. One thing that we might not have mentioned last time is that you do want to make sure that the puree that you add does not have any wild yeast in it, and it probably will. So you can watch our puree making video to see how you will take care of that yeast to make sure that it won't start re-fermenting in here. Because the sorbate only takes care of the yeast that's in here when you add the sorbate.
Right.
Anything that you add afterwards, such as the puree, that might have wild yeast on it, could start re-fermenting again, and then you're going to lose both the sweetness and you're going to lose some of the flavor again. So this is, it's got quite a bit of flavor. I could use probably a little more sweetness in it, but
yeah, you could easily adjust the amount of puree you put in there. You could have put more than 10 ounces.
Yeah, the flavor part is good though. So I mean, you could use the 10 ounces of puree and add sugar to taste after it's sat in here for 2 months, like
or allulose.
Or
allulose. If you didn't want sugar.
Yep. But this is good. So what we're going to do now is cold crash it. So that means put it in the fridge for at least 3 days. Longer is actually better, but at least 3 days as close to freezing as you can manage. And that's going to cause all this sediment to go back to the bottom, but it's going to leave the flavor in the wine that we stirred in. And then when the sediment's all back down at the bottom again, and this is as clear as possible, you can either just bottle it from there, being careful not to grab any of the sediment at the bottom, or rack it again and bottle it from there, or cold crash it again if you want it more clear, however you want to do it. So, but as far as this video is concerned, I think we're done with this as far as what we're going to do. So we'll cold crash it and bottle it. You can watch our bottling video to see how we would bottle it.
Yeah, because
it's the same process.
Bottling's bottling. It doesn't matter if it's Blackberry wine or white Zinfandel. Yeah. Thank you guys for watching another one of our videos. I hope you enjoyed the video and try this Blackberry wine because I think it's really yummy. Unless you don't like blackberries. But otherwise, it's great.
It's your loss. More for us.
So as always, please like this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And if you have, thank you very much for your support. We appreciate you. Until next time, cheers.